Did you know a group of activists used Muhammad Ali to infiltrate an FBI office and spill their darkest secrets? Or that an antiquated FBI system allowed a future mass murderer to illegally buy a gun? How about the time an FBI forensic artist photoshopped an innocent Spanish politician to look like the world's most infamous terrorist? The FBI has been said by some detractors to stand for famous but incompetent, or even the Federal Bureau of Incompetence. And these insane stories of FBI failures and bizarre behaviors from the Bureau's many agents will show you exactly why. Let's start with the tale of forbidden love, as in the love between a brutal ISIS fighter and an FBI agent who was supposed to be investigating him. In 2014, Dennis Cuthbert was a rising star in one of the Middle East's most feared terrorist organizations. This German rapper turned jihadist had become a key propaganda tool for ISIS's campaign in Syria, appearing in a number of propaganda films, including one where he's holding an actual severed human head. This probably hasn't made you think, wow, what a catch! But you are not FBI translator Daniela Green, who fell for Dennis's neck-chopping charm. Green, who was already married and yet still inexplicably fell for Dennis, lied to her husband and said she was going back to Germany to visit family. She then entered Syria via Turkey to be with her beloved and found, big surprise there, that Dennis Cuthbert wasn't actually a very nice guy, and that ISIS's general attitude towards women's rights can generously be described as a little bit dated. Already, having an agent defect to ISIS for love when she was part of a group that meant to be rooting out ISIS sympathizers in the States was an embarrassing failure for the FBI. But what happened next made this whole situation even more of a scandal. After a few weeks in Syria, Green became sick of the #ISIS life and decided to come home and face whatever punishment waited for her. When she did return stateside, the punishment she was given was actually shockingly light, a 2-year sentence, which raised criticism of favorable treatment because of her affiliation with the FBI. In an attempt to put out the flames of controversy, the FBI released a statement saying that in light of the Green incident, they took several steps in a variety of areas to identify and reduce security vulnerabilities. The FBI continues to strengthen protective measures in carrying out this vital work. They declined to comment further after that, probably just hoping to put the whole mess behind them. Of course, you can't control when you fall in love, in much the same way you can't stop it when you catch a case of dance fever. This happened to one FBI agent in the Mile High Spirits Bar in Denver, 2018. Chase Bishop, aged 30, was off duty and having a good time, but for some reason, he was still packing his service weapon. If he'd just decided to enjoy himself responsibly at the bar, this wouldn't have been a problem. But the spirit of the dance possessed Chase, and then all hell broke loose. While he was bussing it down sexual style on the dance floor, his pistol fell out of its holster and went off, non-fatally shooting another patron in the bar in the lower leg. The possibly drunken Chase scrambled for the gun, but by then the damage was already done. He appeared in court a few months later where he pleaded guilty to third-degree assault and was given 2 years probation. He's far from the only agent you'll see acting unwise in the heat of the moment today. Sometimes the FBI expands its purview beyond stopping crimes and ventures into emergency disaster relief. Such was the case in May 2002 when a runaway barge caused a catastrophic bridge collapse in Webbers Falls, Oklahoma, killing over a dozen people. The FBI helped coordinate the local police and other first responders in the aftermath of the disaster, but who was there to coordinate the FBI? Lucky for everyone there, a high-ranking military official was on the scene, Captain William James Clark, dressed to the nines in his fatigues and ready to take action. He helped take command of the rescue efforts for nearly 3 days, showing the cops and the FBI a thing or two about military bravery and efficiency. Except, William James Clark wasn't actually an Army captain. He was a mentally ill man who seemed to enjoy compulsively pretending to be an Army captain. But in the panic of the situation, even seasoned FBI agents just saw the uniform and deferred to his authority. This would be one thing if military impersonation was his only crime, but he also stole supplies from a military surplus store, defrauded a hotel, and filched someone's pickup truck, claiming that they were needed to assist in the rescue effort. Clark then fled the scene and tried to escape to Canada, where the Royal Canadian Mounted Police quickly captured him. He was sent back to the US, where he was tried and imprisoned for 5 years as a result of both this bizarre episode and a prior history of check fraud. When he was released from prison in 2007, he quickly went back to his old ways, contacting the Russian embassy and confessing that he was part of a plot to kill Russian President Vladimir Putin. The fact that anyone thought this guy was for real, especially the FBI agents, is embarrassing for all involved. Another one of the FBI's many duties is running background checks on Americans trying to buy guns using the National Instant Criminal Background Check system. And there is sadly a lot of room for error here. Take, for example, one young man who tried to buy a .45 caliber handgun in South Carolina back in 2015. The 21-year-old was not legally allowed to do this, as he had a previous conviction for a narcotics-related offense, but the data around his crime was uploaded to the National Data Exchange, which the agent running the man's background check didn't actually have access to, due to a clerical error made by the clerk where he'd first been jailed. Not enough effort was made to follow up on these issues, and when 3 days passed without a denial being issued by the FBI, the gun was sold. The problem was that the purchaser was Dylan Roof, who would later use that same weapon to commit a horrific racially motivated mass murder in a predominantly black Charleston church, killing 9 people. Then FBI Director James Comey promised a full review of the errors that let this tragedy slip through the cracks, and Richard M. Gergel, the judge presiding over Roof's trial, harshly criticized the FBI for a series of abysmally poor policy choices that led to a mass murderer getting his murder weapon. Geez, okay, that got a little dark. Let's try for a sillier FBI fail to break the tension. Prior to his assassination back in 2011, Osama bin Laden had consistently graced the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and the organization at times felt like they were clutching at straws in trying to apprehend the world's most infamous terrorist. Given that bin Laden hadn't been seen by anyone in the West in almost a decade, it was up to an FBI forensic artist to create a mock-up of what a 52-year-old bin Laden might look like. They just happened to do so by sloppily editing some of bin Laden's facial features onto an actual photo of Spanish politician Gaspar Llamazares, former leader of Spain's United Left coalition. Naturally, Llamazares was pretty incensed by this whole development, especially given that the photo had been used on the FBI's Rewards for Justice website. He felt almost as though they had put a price on his head by association. Speaking on the matter, he said, "I was surprised and angered, because it's the most shameless use of a real person to make up the image of a terrorist. It's almost like out of a comedy if it didn't deal with matters as serious as bin Laden and citizen security." In response, the FBI claimed that any use of Mr. Llamazares' image was completely coincidental and unintentional, but that probably didn't make him feel much better. This embarrassing failure also muddied the waters on what had long been considered the United States' top priority global manhunt. What a bizarre and hilarious disaster. It's important to remember that even FBI agents are only human, and they're victims to all the same weaknesses as the rest of us, including the almost unstoppable urge to take a joyride in someone else's incredibly expensive Ferrari sports car when we have the opportunity. This happened in 2008, when a stolen 1995 Ferrari F50 was recovered, one of only 50 in the United States. The owner was probably overjoyed, and then things took a turn for the worst. The car was impounded by an FBI facility in Kentucky while the agents conducted their investigation into the theft. And when it was time to move it, the task fell upon FBI agent Fred Kingston. The thing is, FBI agents don't get paid the kind of salary that would ever allow them to buy a high-performance sports car like this, so he decided to take it for a ride with Assistant U.S. Attorney J. Hamilton Thompson riding shotgun, where the two of them promptly crashed the $750,000 car. The U.S. government refused to compensate the owner for the damages, claiming that it wasn't responsible for what happens to stolen vehicles when those vehicles are in the hands of law enforcement. It's just another incredibly expensive FBI fail. However, failures that just result in damaged property will always be at the more minor end of the scale when it comes to devastating FBI mistakes. Another example on the more severe end is the death of Ulysses Valladares, a family man kidnapped by a pair of petty criminals in Texas, claiming he owed them $8,000. When Valladares didn't have the money, the criminal duo kidnapped him from his home in front of his son and spirited him away to a residence in Houston. Later that same day, Valladares' brother received a call from the kidnappers, claiming to be members of the cartel and demanding a large ransom for his safe return. Rather than bargaining with the kidnappers, the brother made the reasonable decision to contact the FBI and alert them to the situation. However, this would end in disaster, as when the two FBI agents put on the case entered into the home where Valladares was being held, they shot and killed him instead of the suspects. It was an idiotic mistake that cost an innocent man his life and a young boy his father. While they sometimes make mistakes in the line of duty, the FBI tries its best to take its work seriously, even when the suspect it's going after isn't serious in the slightest. This is exactly what happened in the bizarre 2-year saga where the FBI investigated a mysterious online group known as the Church of the Hammer, which seemed to have a violent hatred for the most oppressed minority of them all, Goths. They tried to glean information from the Church of the Hammer's exclusive forum, God Hates Goths, where a lone Goth was desperately trying to convince the churchgoers, who claimed to be an even more radical offshoot of the infamous Westboro Baptist Church, that Goths weren't actually Satanists. These attempts to convince them failed, and the FBI became concerned by the hate group's increasingly violent rhetoric against Goths and other groups that they believed to be in league with Satan. The agents began their investigation, reaching out to people involved in alleged incidents reported on the God Hates Goths forum, only to hit a strange wall. None of the people they contacted had ever heard of the Church of the Hammer. What was going on here? Eventually, after 2 years of deliberation, they went straight to the source, GodHatesGoths.com, the group's official website, where they made a horrifying discovery: the whole thing was a joke. It was a parody website and a blog making fun of real-life hate groups like the Westboro Baptist Church. The FBI quickly closed the file, mortified by their mistake. We feel some second-hand embarrassment just thinking about it. And now an embarrassing failure brought about by one of the FBI's most formidable opponents. No, we don't mean a diabolical serial killer, a connected mafioso, or a domestic terrorist cell. We're talking about the activist group Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. This small but incredibly resourceful group of anti-war activists made it their business to stamp out government corruption in the only way they could: by acts of espionage that allowed them to bring the dirty secrets of various government operations to light. In 1971, this ragtag group of believers was about to take on the FBI and win. The operation that led to the FBI experiencing so much embarrassment was centered around one of their headquarters in Medea, Pennsylvania, where a huge cache of sensitive files was being stored at the time. The idea of somebody having the guts to rob an FBI building was almost unthinkable, so nobody was particularly suspicious when a young female student reporter approached the building and asked if she could conduct interviews with some of the people inside. She was writing a report about jobs for women for her school newspaper. Little did the FBI know this woman wasn't a student reporter. She was Bonnie Raines, a member of the commission, who was using her access to case the building for potential vulnerabilities that she and her team could exploit. She didn't give her real name and even wore gloves the entire time to avoid leaving any prints. Nobody suspected a thing. You see, the commission had a talent for infiltrating government buildings in strange and creative ways that nobody ever saw coming. In 1970, a year before the FBI raid, they infiltrated a draft office in Delaware that was recruiting people for the much-maligned Vietnam War. The door had locks that none of them were able to break, so a few hours before the break-in, they wrote a note reading, "Please don't lock this door tonight," and taped it to the entrance. In a feat of truly impressive social engineering, nobody locked the door that night, so they were able to enter and steal files on the selective surface. But the FBI building required a little more finesse. Another member of the break-in team was Keith Forsyth, who'd been training as a locksmith in order to learn the necessary skills to become a master infiltrator. But locks were only one part of the story. They needed to pick the perfect time to infiltrate, and that time was the evening of March 8, 1971, the same night that Muhammad Ali was set to face off against Joe Frazier in the aptly named Fight of the Century. The commission infiltration team figured that everyone would be so glued to their television sets and radios to hear the recap of the fight that nobody would notice them breaking in. And miraculously, they were right. However, when the 8-member team descended onto the building, there was an immediate complication. The lock on the door was much more complicated than Keith had first anticipated. In the end, he had to settle for using a crowbar to pry the door open, allowing the team to enter and steal over 1,000 documents, while anyone who could have protected them was too invested in boxing. This would be a humiliating enough failure for the FBI, but the significance of what the commission uncovered that night took the embarrassment to a whole new level. The Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI had just uncovered its darkest secret, COINTELPRO. This was a plot first started by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, which created a mandate for the ruthless persecution of people of color and activist groups across the United States, which had spied, threatened, intimidated, blackmailed, and even killed various left-wing figures. Ironically, one of these people was Muhammad Ali himself, who'd earned the ire of the FBI by being a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War and also converting to Islam. He and the commission had unknowingly helped each other out. They sent the COINTELPRO files to various news organizations around the country, with the Washington Post eventually publishing the files and creating an earth-shaking scandal for the FBI that made them shut down the entire COINTELPRO program. And the cherry of the failure on top of this ridiculous fail Sunday, they never actually caught the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. We only know any of their names and thought processes around this because they went public in 2014 after the statute of limitations for their crimes had been reached, making them untouchable for the FBI. The United States' premier crime-fighting body was outfoxed by a group of activists in their 20s. But sometimes the activists don't even need to make the first move to be involved in a pretty humiliating FBI failure. Such was the case with a couple of anti-war activists named Mick Kelly and Lyndon Gaboy. The FBI raided their Minneapolis home to discover whether they had any terroristic intentions, but their search came up clean. The FBI clearly felt guilty for inconveniencing the poor couple over nothing, so they left them a gift: several highly classified FBI files. The couple didn't even find them until 2 weeks after the failed raid, but when they did, they were gobsmacked at the information they were seeing. There were photos of other apartments they searched, multi-page investigation plans, interrogation questions, and information on other Minneapolis residents that they were hoping to search. With the counsel of his lawyer, Mick Kelly released these files to the media, and an FBI spokesperson later confirmed they all appeared to be legitimate. There was one file left behind that was so secretive Kelly chose not to release it after being advised against it by his lawyer. It contained the names and personal details of FBI agents. This is certainly an extremely embarrassing situation for the FBI, but they honestly got off lucky here. If these same documents were left in the hands of actual dangerous criminals rather than a couple who like to protest against war, it would have left some FBI agents in extremely compromising positions. But sometimes the greatest threats aren't criminals or non-violent peace activists, they're the FBI employees right under your nose. Like Robert Hansen, a former FBI agent who was also one of the most effective double agents in American history. Hansen worked for the FBI for 20 years, and he spent almost all that time also being paid by the USSR and then modern Russia to undermine the United States' interests on their behalf. He was more proactive than most traitors, too, reaching out to the Soviets first and offering the names of undercover agents while keeping his own name a secret. Over time, he rose through the ranks on both sides, as the FBI became aware of a disconcerting number of their undercover agents being exposed. They put together the Soviet Analytical Unit to help find the mole behind it all, and the head of that unit was none other than Robert Hansen. That's right, the FBI put the man that they were looking for in charge of finding himself. Probably goes without saying that he did not do a great job. He was eventually caught in 2001, where he narrowly avoided getting the death penalty for treason, but not before briefly making the FBI the laughingstock of the intelligence world, making this probably the greatest of all FBI fails. Now check out 50 insane declassified FBI secrets you didn't know and more FBI facts and stories. Or watch this instead.